Scarlet and Violet are over 2 years old now, but there's still no news about when we're getting Shiny Koraidon or Shiny Miraidon. With Pokemon Day right around the corner, I've looked at every Shiny Legendary distribution from the past 10 years to see if they'll release anytime soon. Reshiram and Zekrom were the first Legendary Pokemon to be Shiny locked, meaning their Shiny forms couldn't legitimately be found in-game. Since it was the first successful time the series had done this, I guess they hadn't really thought about it too much, because not only could you still find Shiny Kyurem for some reason, they also never distributed Shiny Reshiram or Zekrom. They wouldn't be available until 4 years later in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. After they realized, oh yeah, we actually need to give these shiny Pokemon away. There seemed to be 3 main factors that influenced them to do this, with the first being the animated series. On the 29th of October 2015, the first episode of the anime's X, Y, and Z arc aired in Japan. Also, fun fact, the episode was called From A to Z, which I think is really funny considering how close that is to ZA. To celebrate this, Xerneas and Yveltal were distributed in their shiny forms for the first time ever. Zygarde was given away alongside these two, but only in its regular form. Its shiny form was released much later. A few months after the event began in Japan, the distribution reached South Korea in March 2016, and eventually the America and PAL regions in May 2016. When Shiny Xerneas and Yveltal were released in Japan, it had been 2 years since the release of Pokemon X and Y. This was also about a year after Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and a year before Sun and Moon. To put this into perspective, this is around the same place in Scarlet and Violet's lifetime we're living through right now. Scarlet and Violet is around 2 years old, the DLC is just over a year old, and we're less than a year away from Legend ZA being released. If you want to hear about how I know when Legend ZA is releasing, there's a video on this channel explaining it pretty well. After Xerneas and Yveltal, Shiny Zygarde was distributed almost 3 years later in June 2018 to celebrate the year of legendary Pokemon. Shiny Zygarde wouldn't be legitimately available again until around 2 years later with the release of the Crown Tundra, and this is actually still the only way you can catch it. If Shiny Koraidon and Miraidon are released to coincide with some large event in the Pokemon Horizons animated series, this could actually line up pretty well with the Pokemon Day celebrations. In Japan, the series is divided into chapters or arcs instead of seasons in the West. These arcs tend to last around 20 episodes, with the first being Liko and Roy's departure, running from the 1st to the 25th episode. The Sparkling of Terrapagos ran from the 26th to the 45th episode, Terrastal debut from the 46th to the 67th, and Rayquaza Rising running from the 68th episode onwards. If you want to avoid spoilers for Pokemon Horizons, I'd recommend skipping to the time shown on screen, because there are a few episodes we have to mention that have only been released in Japan, and some episodes that haven't aired yet, but we do know the titles of. I'm also not a Pokemon Horizons expert, so please correct me in the comments if I get anything wrong. First, the main characters have actually already reached Area 0 by episode 80, and while they haven't yet encountered Koraidon or Miraidon, this at least gives us a possibility of it happening in the future alongside a shiny distribution. Secondly, many fans are expecting the current arc Rayquaza Rising to end on February 28th, the day after Pokemon Day, with the release of episode 86. The main argument for this is that the main character's goals for the entire series is to reach the hidden paradise known as Laqua, and episode 85 is titled Arrival, the Paradise of Laqua, hinting at the story finally reaching this climax. There's a pretty good chance that Pokemon Day features a trailer for the next arc for Pokemon Horizons, or even a new series altogether. If it features Koraidon or Miraidon, this teaser could also feature, or at least hint towards, a distribution for a shiny Koraidon and Miraidon. Talking about Pokemon Day, I'll be covering every bit of news that comes out of it. If you don't subscribe to Radio Mochi right now, you might miss the biggest Pokemon news of the year, like any secrets hiding in the next Legends ZA trailer. Also, can I use this time to talk about how much I hate Shiny Miraidon? It had so much potential, but it just looks so naked and boring, especially compared to how great Shiny Koraidon looks. I I don't know, is that an unpopular opinion? Which one do you think looks better? Anyway, the second thing that seems to influence these shiny legendary distributions is the trading card game. Solgaleo and Lunala had their shinies released from October to December 2019, depending on the region. If you had Sun or Ultra Sun, you'd be able to receive a shiny Lunala, and if you had Moon or Ultra Moon, you'd get a shiny Solgaleo. This was to celebrate the release of Sun and Moon's final main TCG expansion, Cosmic Eclipse. Unfortunately, if released alongside Scarlet and Violet's final TCG expansion, this could mean we'll be waiting quite a bit longer for shiny Koraidon and Miraidon. For the record, I think this is extremely unlikely though, because Solgaleo and Lunala were the last shiny legendaries to be distributed because of the trading cards. Coincidentally, they were actually released around the same time as Sword and Shield as well, giving us a great segue into the third and final influence for these shiny legendaries being given away. Pre-order bonuses! I suppose you'd say pre-release celebrations or something like that, because a few of these didn't actually require you to buy anything. While Solgaleo and Lunala were given away around the same time that Sword and Shield released, it would be a bit more accurate to say this started with Necrozma. Strangely, it was only ever given away in Japan and South Korea, never making its way to the West. But nevertheless, shiny Necrozma was distributed for the first time in September 2019 as a pre-order bonus for Pokemon Sword and Shield. This continued with shiny Zacian and Zamazenta, which were distributed worldwide in October and November 2021, depending on your region. This was around 2 years after the release of Sword and Shield, and around the same time that Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were released. While there was never an official, explicit reason for the two shiny legendaries being released, it's pretty safe to assume it was to celebrate the Generation 4 remakes. In fact, these shinies were available as pre-order bonuses for those two games, but only in South Korea. In the rest of the world, you'd get them from serial codes given away at various video game stores, online and in person, depending on where you lived. Unless you live in Russia or South Africa, then you just had to send an email to Nintendo for some reason. And the last shiny legendary Pokemon to be released through this method was Eternatus. Unlike Necrozma, Pokemon finally realized, hey, we should probably release this outside of Japan as well. And so they did, releasing it worldwide in September and October 2022. Just a few months before Scarlet and Violet. And this was explicitly to celebrate the release of Scarlet and Violet. Pokemon Legends ZA is likely to release sometime in the summer. Let's say, random guess, July 17th. I think the most likely outcome is that we see shiny Koraidon and shiny Miraidon released around the same time, maybe late June or early July, to celebrate these games releasing. Maybe even as pre-order bonuses in certain regions like South Korea. So there you go, those are the two most likely options. Announced on Pokemon Day to celebrate the anime, or sometime in the summer to celebrate the release of Legends ZA. Talking about Legends ZA, do you think we'll get any new Mega Evolutions? Because there might be a hint inside of Scarlet and Violet that supports that idea. It's actually really interesting. There's a video on screen you can click right now and you can learn all about it.